Welcome to the Story of the Apprentice podcast. A podcast about D&D, about storytelling, about the story of this little fella over in the other screen, not me, becoming a professional game master. Me being the wise sage and him being the apprentice. I am one half of this little duo, Jesse T. William. And with me today is
Honk me sweetly.
Torque Me Sweetly.
That's me.
That's right, Torque Me Sweetly. We're here to talk about fucking TRPGs and stuff. And we're gonna do that. Do you have any topics? Do you have any
I
things?
checked. I remember there was a couple notes
Oh,
taken from last time.
I remember.
Let me see if I can find them. I know that I
I
wrote
remember.
them down somewhere. They exist in a place. Oh, I took this. These notes really in an interesting way. And by interesting, I mean that I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. Like I get it. I get what I
Mm,
was going for,
mm.
but holy shit. So I mean there are a few topics, but we can like if you have something that's like really like fresh on the frying pan, we can
I
also
got
do
I got a
that and
minor
move
thing.
on.
I got a minor
Okay.
thing, which is so I started a new saga this week, which is what I call my little stories now. And
Okay.
little saga. Because it's the name of the thing that I'm gonna make into a TTRPG that's so complex. A little saga this week, and the first two parties start this week. The next two parties start next week, and all these parties have been playing in this setting for a long time. Uh, it's the Evans. It's the one that's whoop, right there. Um, but they've been playing like kind of or this saga takes place in the past, about
Mm.
75 years. And the setting itself, it's very homebrewed. It's very kind of like custom or whatever. Um, and so when introducing people to the setting for the first time, I presented them with this idea that, oh, you're an adventurer from somewhere else coming into the setting, because I didn't really expect or want people to buy into, oh, you're a very specific homebrew race that you have no concept of, or whatever.
Mm.
But now that all these players have spent this time in the setting, they know what an Aeginian is, a Tanal is. Some of them know what a Fedokin is. These are all random homebrew races, but they know what these things are. So they uh in this saga now, it's all these characters are these races or these things that would have been local to um the setting at the time. And oh boy, is it ever really nice to run a second campaign with a group of people when all the players know each other, when they're familiar with the world, and when um what's we doing here, when they're buying in. So I don't really have a lot of insight to add, but just seeing what happens when you have players who are familiar and you trust, and you can give more information to, is exciting. And
Mm.
I'm looking forward to when the next like 10 campaigns start in like July, August, um, to have that level of buy-in from a much higher number of people. Um, I'm just excited about it. I'm
Oh,
excited about this
excited.
next phase. Yeah,
Excited little creature. It sounds like a good time. Um, I know everybody else is excited to engage.
yeah, yeah.
Hold on, I have to sneeze.
Bless you again.
Thank you.
Get double blessed.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Look at me. I'm so lucky. Um, I had a thought and then it left with my sneezes. That was
Sneeze your
my
thoughts
brain
away.
like ejecting them from my head. I'm not allowed to have those, I guess. Um, oh, there's something so cursed about having Elijah's Discord open in the background and seeing all those character names. Um, it's a little ridiculous to look at to view. Um, but yeah, that sounds like a very good time. Is that game? Did you did you start the what is it? The little horror anthology thing?
I did. I'm also writing that horror anthology, and
Oh, yeah.
that's been really fun as well. All the players, I was hoping to get like maybe a new player or something, but did not happen. Um, but yeah, three players who play in my other games who joined this one, and that's going really well as well. It hasn't entered the scary parts yet. So it's just this little like story about people on a fun little mission and all these fun characters and everyone gets to talk and have a good time. And they're like, oh, I think this is happening and I think this is happening. And I'm just like, they don't know. They don't know
They
what I'm
don't
gonna
know.
do.
I feel like that at a constant rate is he. They don't know. It's a
Yeah.
painful experience for me, but also a great one at the same time. But that's mostly just because I like running my mouth about things.
Mm, mm. It's hard to keep in all these secrets, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I want to tell everyone. Definitely the kind of DM who's like I always look to give to keep players informed. Um, I don't like keeping people in the dark, but also a good portion of running a game is keeping people in the dark. It is holding the mystery. I think we've talked about this before. This is like a core principle of my storytelling, and like I've started collaborating with someone on two settings. So one, Trexia, who you know, is working with me on parts of the Ebons, but she also is working on a Polynesian setting, and um, we've started. She had a bunch of ideas or a couple of ideas that she wanted to get working on in the whatever on Monday when we meet last Monday, and um, it's so satisfying for me to peel away the layers of mystery with someone and be like these are the things that build up to where we find a setting, and then how do we like basically just add the smoke screen or not even the smoke screen but just like add the content of the now and have it not exactly like be obvious where it came from. Like there's a story. Like if you looked at things, you'd be like, oh, there's a story here, but it's not going to tell itself in a way, I suppose. Um, anyways, I don't know, I'm just that's the thought. Last session, last session,
Last session.
last pod, last episode, episode 10. We're in double digits now. You asked or were asking about gods and stuff.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I thought it might be a good idea to talk about the way that we build gods.
mhm. Do you have something to like open on with that? Do you have opening
Um,
statements?
I am. I could definitely. I can have one. I can open that little box. Um, I mean, mostly just like this is something that I've talked a lot about with Jack is like kind of like the way different people might uh, uh like if, wow, I feel like I have gotten so articulate over the last when it comes to these and then I just like lost it all right now. It's I'm no longer able to speak. Um
It's because I'm so pretty and disarming and charming. And I if people just find
That's
it hard to speak around me.
definitely the
Um,
reason.
yeah, definitely
Definitely
the
has
reason.
nothing to do with like previous alcohol consumption on my
No,
part. Uh,
I'm so perfect and awesome that
yeah,
everyone just has a hard time talking to me. It's because I'm good.
yeah, obviously. Um, but um, uh, how do I make this make sense? Like the way that it does in my brain. Um,
Do you have like a core um belief or like philosophy around what the gods mean to begin with? Because that's where I would start of like what does it
yes.
mean to be a god in I don't know if that helps
And
at
it
all,
really
but
depends on like what sort of like what I'm I homebrew a lot. I mean, not homebrew. I world build a lot. I do homebrew a lot, but I world build a lot. And so like the setting that all my players are playing in, which is like different settings within the same world. However, there will probably be a point in time in which I'm just not messing around in this world. Um uh, Based on things I can't talk about. Um but or maybe I do. Who knows? Once again, I've lost my ability to be coherent and be articulate. So we're just gonna be a little silly this time. Silly guy Tucker in the podcast. Tornking it up. But so it really depends on like what I'm doing. I have a lot of fun creating gods and thinking about them and like their purpose within a world and their meaning and how they came about. And I tend to have like sometimes like some very differing ideas of like what I'm doing with them. And again, it really depends on like the world that I am working in. Um, in this setting, me deciding how much I can say. um, because the people who watch this are like people who mostly other people who play in my games. So I don't want to immediately like ruin this like large aspect of the world for them. Um, you know what? I'm gonna talk about it, and if they listen, that's their fault. Um, good, get fucked. Uh, I don't think it's anything too crazy, but like when I think about like in this world, the way that I create gods, this is like a question that I asked Jack once, about like um if like the gods he creates are really and truly like gods in the way that like um that sometimes like we in the real human life might like interpret them. Not everybody. There are definitely like plenty of people out there who are like come from like different beliefs, but like when you think about like the way that like anybody part of any Abrahamic religion like views the idea of God, it's kind of like a creator that's been there since the end of time, what is truly a god. Whereas I tend to play in spaces of, at least for this setting, where um it's a lot more ambiguous than that. And I don't set a lot of like strict boundaries, but also I another thing I do like very heavily is like the way that gods are interpreted in the world can be drastically different from the actual entity itself, its goals, its motivations, what it is and what it represents. I'm not often very forthright with my players in like this, like they go, I want to worship this god. I tell them what they know about from a cultural standpoint, but a lot of the time in reality, like what that god is quite removed from what I've told them, depending, because every god like in the world that I create, um I mean this is a little bit of Jack stuff too, because Jack is also responsible for a lot of this world building, um is was usually something before it was this, um uh a very long time ago, and they can kind of present in various states of like um what is the word, attachment, you know like various states of attachment to like the idea of self. um oh my god. uh, um but so it really 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 depends on what world I'm playing with, and like what like the kind of the point of the gods in that specific world is. I could definitely go more into like the actual meaning of like gods within the setting that I'm currently running. um but a lot of the gods in the world that I run, even those that have like heavy ties to concepts that are like inherently benevolent, a lot of them are like um individuals, you know what I mean? And so like their motivations can like vary quite heavily. Um but then I have some gods that are like so attached, like detached from from the ego and from like a being that kind of individual, regardless of power level, that it's just like it's a complete like detachment from any concept like that, and the way that they function is so like different. But it doesn't necessarily make one or the other not a god. It has more to do with like um their influence in the types of like worship they gather than it has to do with like a innate like godliness, if that makes sense. It's more has to do with power level associations, worship, following, that sort of thing. At least in this setting, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah. Um, I will just explain what I how mine functions. I might have told you before. I might have just really told Trixia. And then
We've
I'll
talked a little bit
yeah,
about it before.
yeah. And then I'll kind of ask you what how yours compare. So from the perspective of people in the world and even most of the gods themselves, um, with the exception of one, who is the god of mystery, no one actually knows what the cosmos are. Um, um, they're even yeah, I'm gonna leave this detail out because it's somewhat related to the gods and how they function, but it's more like logistics than it is meaning, I think. It's a bit tied, but not necessary, I think. So the gods, to me, are more not in line with Abrahamic gods in the sense that um, they've been there the whole time. All gods were once some form of like mortal creature or like material creature
Mm.
that became something else. Um, but I think what's important to me is the difference between a like mortal and a god, and that meaning there. I think gods in my world are infinite or operate on degrees of infinity. Um, there is a hierarchy to that, though, in that each god represents something that is fundamentally true about the experience of the cosmos. So, the god of life, who is for those who are like more educated, the fourth most powerful god and holds the kind of truth or the concepts that are as a collective like the fourth things that are like closest to the truth, fundamental truth of the world. Um, which is the power of like life and community and taking care of one another. Um, so yeah, fundamentally, the gods represent things that are true. They cannot be killed. Um, they can kind of bump up against each other and all of the gods and their kind of infinite abstract beings. Like, if you were to imagine, um, like a bathtub filled with different, um, like I guess almost like pockets of water and oil or oil and water, and how they don't mix, but they're like always taking up the same amount of space. Um,
Mm.
I think though the reason I do that, which is maybe more to the point, um, is is what it says about the place of a mortal. I don't like storytelling. To me, storytelling in which a mortal can go up and slap a god in the face, um, is not bad. I just don't like it. I just don't like the storytelling that places a huge amount that can place a huge amount of importance on a single individual, um uh who does not embody something like perfectly. And when someone does embody something perfectly, they they become a god. Like
Mm.
when they hit the core truth of something, they become a god. And so, to me, what that does, for the structure of storytelling and the perspective of the world, is that this is a world, and there's a lot of different things that affect this, but this is a world that has a lot of bad in it, but is fundamentally good.
Mm.
That because there is a god of life, and other good aligned gods, um, praying to those gods and understanding those lessons and thus becoming more powerful amongst those religions makes you stronger and a better representative of faith. That isn't to say that the evil gods are not powerful, or a threat. Like it's they're I think the other thing I should say is that within each truth there is a flaw. No single idea can encapsulate the entirety of understanding. And the
Mm.
one that gets closest, which is absurdity, is the idea that everything is fallible and everything should be looked at for its wisdom and its flaws. Um, but yeah, like I think the scale of my world, I think is very like tries to separate, um the idea of, a person is going to save the world, even though a lot of players and characters being like, oh, we're doing this thing that's saving the world. You're not. Like some people are over here saving Actios, and some people are over here saving Folia, and some people over here saving, whoop, the Ebons. Look at how big the world is. um and there's this idea that, um like there is so much outside of you to connect with. I think those are all, that's not the most coherent thing to say, I think, but I think all of those kind of ideas of the scale of the gods and what they mean, and a staticness of it, and a kind of meaning of, puts people in positions where, like I think there's an egotistical thing I see a lot in storytelling, in which, like in Critical Role and Dimension 20, where people are like, we're better than the gods. We're the gods are so like evil and bad and flawed and this and that. And mortals are like, and it's like they're, well, that's kind of a weird, like that puts people in a really weird position, doesn't it? Like an odd kind of philosophical position of like, so like what's the point of the gods? Like I think there is this among a lot of, and I'm someone who is agnostic, who is like atheist, um but I think a lot of people who are like agnostic or on the atheist kind of spectrum, like this kind of irreverence towards gods because of drama and stuff, which I don't really buy into in a fantasy world. I don't think that's a
I disagree, actually. I disagree. I think I think that way is fine. I've played in the same areas as you, and I tend to like mess around with gods a lot. And in different worlds, we'll have like a lot of different like varying takes on like the way that I do gods. Uh really again just depends on like what I feel like playing with, especially as somebody who like I don't um really identify as anything. Um I don't even really I don't identify as a Christian or agnostic or atheist. I don't have like I just don't know. I have a very complicated relationship with faith. I grew up in an extremely like evangelical Christian household. Like I get caught doing something and I sit there and I write the same Bible verse over and over and over again. And like my life was like very heavily dominated by that culture. um, has caused a lot of problems for me. And a lot of trauma, like you said. And a lot of people have that. I think that the irreverence towards the gods can be done like really poorly. I will say that. I think it can be done very poorly. Um, and I was going to like say, but I was just kind of like waiting for you to like finish your I wasn't gonna, but
I have too many thoughts. I was going on a tangent. I was tangenting. Glad you interrupted.
too too many thoughts. Uh I just thought it would be fun to be like, I disagree. And then maybe the people listening would be like, what?
Ooh, uh-huh.
Huh? Um, um, I don't necessarily think that there is anything like kind of um wrong with it, like at a base level. I think it can be done very poorly. I know that there is a level of like catharsis for me with ripping their importance away. Um, especially like, when you're kind of grown up, you grow up and like Christians have this like very absolute way of like seeing the world. Um, I think I did I t talk about this last time. The thing that my father said to me when I was really young that really like made my brain like and think about gods like a lot.
I think you did. Yeah.
Um where he was like, oh, I think that there are like kind of like rules of the universe that even God must follow, and he's like a Christian. And this is like my more left-leaning side of the family, and that like really blew my mind as a little child and stuck with me. Like I was very young when he said that to me, and it stuck with me like far into my adulthood. And like really stuck with me when it came like with like world building. That's not my point. Point is, it can be done very poorly. I think it can be done very well. Um, but I think it really depends on like the purpose. Um, and and in this specific setting that I'm playing in, um, like in comparison, there are definitely some gods that can be killed in this world, but it also really all like depends on what you consider a god. And this is what I mean, like when I talk about like the way that people build gods in worlds, is like what is considered a god, and like are they really a god? Like what classifies them as that, and what constitutes godhood, like what makes them that. um and like from your point of view, what constitutes them as a god, and then from the people who live within the world you've created, what constitutes a god is like a super super important by the standards of the some of the characters even in the game. And also just like fucking random ass people who live in this world. By the standards of what they consider a god, there are plenty of gods who can be killed. And there's even some that are, in a sense, more literally a god, who could perhaps be killed. It also just like largely in my world depends on the nature of that god. Um, Again, there are some gods that are so deeply far removed from like anything that the material plane, like not the like people on the material plane don't even like really know of their existence, but they are still, by like my standards, constitute as gods, and did like some god shit all over the place. I can't go into details about it, without saying things that I can't say and telling people things I can't tell them. But that again, like you couldn't even have a conversation with them. They could not make their will known on that plane. They are so far removed from what we think it is to be like conscious and sentient. Um, and there is like another god who kind of like plays in a space between that, where like the scene that I was about to set up was going to be a little bit of a humorous one. But like if you put all these gods in a room together and like listen to them gossip, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that guy, I don't know, he's weird as fuck." Because he has kind of started to, I say he, this thing, mysterious orb has like begun to fall into such like a place of deep ego death. And like any physical form it could take is slowly fucking fading into nothing. Um, really, really depends on the nature of the god, but also that there are some gods who actively choose to have a really present role in like the 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 problems of mortals. Like they make a choice to be really involved in situations, not just situations, but like just have like a very strong presence. Um, and it's a choice. It's absolutely a choice, that they make. That again, these gods, it's the same as in your world. At some point, they were all like something mortal. Um, and like the ones that could be killed, definitely. You would definitely have to reach something akin to godhood yourself in the process, to do something like that. But I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with like an irreverence towards the god. However, I think for it to be like done effectively, like there's a few like nails that need to be hammered in first, before it like doesn't feel like what is the word I'm looking for, like cheap, I guess, because I think it is something that is done very like in a very cheap way most of the time. um but like if I ever had a party, right, who got to a point like that, I would want everything that they have done before to probably be like, I would want it to hold that kind of weight. I would want it to like really mean something. I wouldn't want people to easily get to a point where they're like, yeah, fuck the gods. We're better than those guys. It's something that is possible, but it wouldn't be an easy process and it wouldn't be a fun process for that matter either. Again, I think it can be done well. And I don't watch Critical Role, so I fucking don't have any idea how they do it. I could not make a comment on the cheap level of Critical Role, like and that kind of attitude in Critical Role. I just don't know. um However, I don't think it's a bad thing inherently. I think it can be done very well, uh if it like holds the weight that it's supposed to, and if it has meaning in this world. um and that is really dependent on like A, the world building, and B, the DM, or even like in media. like just the world, the story, what is trying to be told, the themes carrying across. Um, and like there is definitely a point of like for example, in my world, um fuck, wait, how much of that can I have to like think specific about the specific words that I decide to use before I like say something like this. Um, Here's what I'll say. The last mortals who would try to achieve godhood in the world that I have created are, for lack of a better word, abominations because of the way that they went about it. For a party who could get close to that same sort of like goal, they would be running a really, really, really dangerous risk of falling into the same pit because of like the nature of gaining power. That kind of power, the kind of power to like alter like planes, you know what I mean, to alter like the cosmos. That's what I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna say anything else.
When it comes to like players' involvement with gods, because I also like there's the gods in my world, which are like
Mhm.
the representing of truth or some aspects of truth, different aspects of the truth of the world. Um, and then there are the demigods, and I think it's a hard thing to explore because for most players, it's much more sensible to, especially with how the settings are, because like I don't want players to be confused at all. So um I always want to make it clear. I think it's wiser to make it clear the difference between gods and demigods. Um, uh, the reason I say this is because demigods are tangible. Like I think a good way to look at it is to think about like Greek or Norse mythology, of the first two that come to mind, in which like the gods go around and like interact with people in like physical forms and things like that. There's a relationship between all the gods because in the purpose of those stories, the gods, or at least for like Greece, the gods are meant to represent, like, you have Poseidon and Zeus, the sea and like storms or like lightning or whatever. Zeus was created to explain like lightning, like that lightning and thunder. Um, and Poseidon was created to explain the sea and tidal waves or whatever. And so those interpretations of gods are very like local or meant not to provide like greater meaning, um or like to introspect, but rather um to like tell the story of this community, in a sense, of these people. At least how I would look at those gods, of like those are maybe not intended to tell the story of the people, but they like these gods are used to tell the story of the people. um and that is, I think, the role of demigods for me, um where the demigods are the stories of the people. They are representative of cycles. They have these longer lived lives, and they watch over the people, and the same kind of patterns might repeat. And it's to represent a sort of like importance of um uh culture, because I don't think this is a world in which there is a correct way to advance, if that makes sense. Like if you diverged a timeline on Earth, um at like the library of Alexandria, like one it got burned and one it didn't, and whatever information was there wasn't lost in one timeline, and say that that world was a little bit more advanced in their technology. I think fundamentally in both those worlds they would express differently, but the principles of technology, because of the laws of the universe, would be very similar. You'd still get satellites and phones and things like it, and the same understandings of the human body, yada yada yada, whatever. But there is no correct understanding or progression for a society. And I think that's where the demigods come in, of like when they have reached a point that is in some way self-sustaining, they reach this point of stagnation, and this kind of lesson of the culture reinforces itself. And when players have something to add to that lesson, um, they have the opportunity to become demigods. Um, and although if I was running a world where I had not already decided when the ascensions happened and which gods took up which positions,
Mm.
I would potentially allow a player who like really 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 understood. I could probably allow like Trexia, because she really really gets the world building and the principles of the storytelling, to like occupy have a character occupy a space of like actual godhood. But to me, the uh yeah, purpose of the demigods, but from the perspective of a commoner in that world, um you wouldn't know that there is a difference between Ethesia, the god of life, and like um let's pull one out. Uh demigods. I don't want to pull one out from Folia because spoilers, but like the Wild Heart, who is a demigod in the Ebons, who is a being that you can go physically see. Most people wouldn't understand the difference because the power is so far above them at commoner spaces,
Mm.
but not far out of reach of understanding. Um, yeah, so I think there's something. Actually, I'll shut up for a second if you have something to add. But I had a different thing I was going to say about like the purpose of and like the perspectives involved in the creation of gods and why people create gods in certain ways. Um, but if you have something to say, I'll create some space here and I'll shut up.
Um, I have like a million things I could say. Um, um, I mean, just thinking about it. How do I even want to say this? Um, when like God, like I make a God in any world I do, there are like pretty much like there are two roads. It's like what are those trees where you answer yes or no, you know? Um, where I kind of like then make a decision of like what are the words that I'm looking for? Um, okay, that entire thought process just left the station. It is 20 miles down the road. I can't see it anymore. Um, so I guess I'm not gonna talk about that. Sorry, go fuck yourself, Jesse and everybody else. You don't get to have that. This is why I'm bad at podcast. No, this is why I'm bad at bad podcast persons, because my brain will just suddenly decide to let go of. It's like, you don't actually need that. We're gonna throw that in the trash can. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks.
There
I kind of wanted to maybe say it, but all
there
right.
were
That's
two paths for creating a god.
there
When you
was like
said
a really specific thought process attached to like me saying that just like absolutely fucking left. Um, because it was going to be something about, I mean, because it partially has something to do with like the story that I'm telling, but also like the function of gods in like the world that I am currently creating, or like in any given like world that is being created. I don't tend to play in this setting. I haven't really played in the realm of demigods. There are certain things in this world that would probably constitute as demigods, but my players and their understanding of true power is so detached. There is not anything that any of them have seen yet that is a display. One of my parties is about to get really close. I'm not gonna say Elijah just did something that I was like, oh, so I'm gonna lay some consequences on you real quick in a game. And they might get like kind of a little taste of like what like even an inkling of power in this world looks like, because there isn't like powerful like wizards and stuff. They don't just like fucking prance around this place, you know? Most There isn't really anybody who has like super significant power um on like a very accessible level, or even like mechanically. And the people that do are found in some really like kind of niche spots um that are like you don't just hear about them. um I can think of like maybe one who has reached a little bit of like kind of like folklore level. um that same party will actually probably meet eventually. And so like holy shit, my head, I need water. There was a point to that. You can't let me tangent too much because then I lose it. um what the fuck was the what was I saying just before that?
you were saying folklore.
Nope,
Um,
it was before that.
before that, I was thinking about what you were saying in relation to my own stuff as well. Um, and I was thinking when you said folklore, I thought of a thing.
Oh, I was talking about
Um,
demigods.
demigods,
That's
right?
that's what I was talking about. Is that I don't really like, so the character like from not just like the characters, but like for any like just kind of like average guy living in this world, like their concept for what power is like, it's like the iceberg thing, you know? Um, they don't have, like most people do not have like a very what is powerful to just somebody, some regular person in this world. Because I tend to again play in space, like in this world, I'm playing in a space that like where magic is not super accessible. And there aren't like just spellcasters around. It's not something that you frequently experience. And so for most people, their idea of like what is like powerful is very skewed. Um and so most things of really, really great power are going to feel like gods. Um there's so much I like want to say that I can't say it. I can't say it. There is like these individuals, I'm going to be really vague about this. And so it just might not, it just because of that, it might not end up making any sense and feel like a moot point. But the creature, the things that I told you about, the last things that attempted to like fast pass into godhood, that are now, for lack of a better word, an abomination. There are a few of those in existence that are actively worshipped as gods, but their existence is not the same as like a large number of the pantheon. And if I had to put a label to them, they would more appropriately be demigods. But that language starts to like lose meaning when I think about the understanding of like the people in this world have of like what power is and what the gods mean. So my understanding as the person who's made this of what a god is versus like the way that like players and like their characters and like an NPC and like just randos who live in this world and their understanding of what a god is very different. Um I think that's also partially because I love, having like trauma from religion, and like a big part of that is like a misinterpretation of the nature of God. Um, and I like to play in that area. That's fun for me. I even again, my most benevolent gods are not very straightforward. And have like very complicated motives, and what they truly are and their nature, fucking their names even, are drastically different from place to place. But also like even in situations of like being the patron of something can be, again, just like not always super straightforward, based on what the the person involved in that pact thinks they know about the god. And things can get very complicated in that aspect. I that is in this specific setting, these gods are a little bit more in line with sort of like the Greek and Norse thing for sure. There are again some differences because there are some gods who like the nature of them is just like so very different from others, and the way they interact in this world. But that's kind of like the point there is there isn't like I don't tend to play in the realm of demigods, but that's just because the word demigod doesn't really mean anything in the world I've created based on what the people know.
Um, I think like in most media, the purpose, like, because all media in some way, whether it's a just a D&D game or a movie or a TV show or whatever, an actual
Mm-hmm.
play, the artists or artist, primary writer, author, the voice is communicating something about the world. They're trying to tell some kind of truth as they see it and as they believe it, and through the medium, teach the lesson. And I think the thing that strikes me about a lot of media is that um I think because there is a perspective that you can take um with the idea of gods, that they represent what people, well, here it is. So you could interpret gods in a world to be just things that people worship, that fundamentally have some aspect of um humanity, and in that, in a parallel, reflects on how people view like celebrity and important figures, your freaking Kanye's and your Trumps and your pharaohs and things like that. I think there's like something interesting there. I think the reason I lean away from gods are just regular, not regular, but like are more accessible is that I find most of the lessons or the things that people are trying to communicate is that um, gods are not actually important, and they don't actually carry meaning. Like to me, that's that it feel like that is a question that is being asked in Critical Role right now. Is that and in the like first season of Fantasy High End Dimension 20 is this idea that the gods are extremely fallible and kind of for Dimension 20 like silly and flawed and obviously for that like is a reflection for Brennan on like and people have called him out on this on like um uh Catholicism and Christianity and how that expresses itself poorly. um I think maybe what I'm getting to is this idea that um a lot of people and specifically in the D&D space um gods are the object of their personal vindication, rather than because I think for me in some senses the gods in my world fundamentally are meant to be perhaps aspirational, or at least as you get closer to the truth, or they're meant to provide understanding and reflection. And when you get into a perspective, and I don't think this is always done intentionally, but for example, in Critical Role, I know a lot of the gods come from uh, or inspired in some senses by the original D&D pantheon. I don't, you know, I find that there's nothing really of value to me within the gods from the D&D pantheons that I've
Can I tell
seen.
you a secret?
Mhm.
Fucking know jack shit about them. I don't
I've
even bother. I was like, I saw that and I was like, I'm not fucking reading that.
I've done like cursory looks, and it's just like it feels like they're trying to create a new mythology with the absence of like what is the purpose behind this mythology, you know. um I don't really connect with them very heavily, and I think in Critical Role in Exandria you have gods that are like very cool as a concept. They did these cool things and they fought these wars on the and then there are all these scars from the gods, but it's like there is that irreverence and almost this like lean towards what I'm interpreting right now in the storytelling is like a the gods might deserve um some sense of vindication, and the gods are flawed, and it's people that's important, and it's like it's true that people are important, um but if there's nothing of value, like I think to me gods are the things that we reference in my world, that people reference to try to do better, and that there is always something or a
I
direction or something you can learn to do better.
Mhm.
um
That's so
uh
many.
and I think what I see in a lot, and this is the last thing I'll say, but what I see in a lot of media is that gods are just kind of like a tacked on idea that don't provide a whole lot of um uh meaning, or the meaning isn't very well communicated at the very least. I don't find that I really understand the meaning of the gods in Exandria after watching three campaigns. I don't, after watching 200 some episodes, I can't really say I know what the I think I can tell you what Matt's perspective on religion in the real world is. I don't know I can tell you what the gods are supposed to really mean as individuals if they have any meaning in that
Mhm.
world.
A couple things. I think like the big difference with it, like because you said the word vindication. First of all, just as like something quick to put down before I get into like my bigger thoughts. I don't give a shit what kind of people stories people tell in D&D in their like personal games. You know? Like you want to tell a dumb story that's just like I'm gonna kill the gods and this is just gonna be like my weird little catharsis. Fucking live it, you know? Live your truth. Do whatever you want to do. It's a game. It's a game. Have fun. But when like I think like media and good media and the point which I've for a while said that like the point of all media, the point of all writing is to convince the reader of something. This is also true when it comes to fiction. You are trying to convince the reader of something, even if it's as simple as convincing the reader that the main character really feels the way that they do, and like it's like convincing them that this is a real person. Um, that's like the whole point. So like when like we get into the themes, and like trying to actually tell a good story. I think like the difference with me is that I like have a lot of religious trauma, but it's not vindication that I'm looking for. I have a very complicated relationship with faith. In the sense that like I have harbored both a lot of resentment towards like this concept of this God. While at the same time I have repeatedly and still to this day will occasionally try to reconnect with that part of myself. Um, we're not going to go into it too much. It's incredibly depressing, honestly. So it's not that fun of a listen. But like that is like a big difference is that, yeah, I do like to play in the God killing realm. However, for me, it's more of a like uh an exploration of themes rather than a set gods are important or they aren't. I enjoy playing in spaces of again just like exploration rather than um for example, um stop that. Sorry, cat. Um um Something that really inspired me with this. It's always something I've been interested in. However, like these games really like were one of the things I think this is a big reason that I became attached to the Dragon Age series is because repeatedly throughout the entire series, that is something that is frequently talked about. What are the gods? There's this whole plot line around this like city where they say the seat of the maker is, which is like this world's equivalent to like the Christian God. And that there were a group of mages who kind of like got into this city, and like for this transgression of like encroaching on this space they were punished. Shit happened. I'm not going to go into the whole plot. um but the concept is, and like what a lot of like these kind of like religious characters, because a lot of this game is just very political in general. There's like this entire religion that very much mirrors like the Catholic Church, um to this god, the maker, and this religion, a part of a chantry. uh, and there is like a really big theme, like a lot of exploration around the idea that after this happened, it says that the maker turned his gaze. He stopped. He basically looked at the world and went, you know what? That's your guys' problem now. I'm just fuck you. Or at least that's what it says. And there is a kind of argument amongst people on if they really exist. Um, and if this person really exists, if the elven gods really exist, and then later in the games, sorry if somebody is like, no, spoilers for a 10-year-old game. But but like by the end of the last game, we do discover that the elven gods weren't really gods. They were just a bunch of fucking assholes. They were just a bunch of fucking dickheads. And like powerful dickheads, but like dickheads nonetheless. They were just some fucking elves. Um, and like there is a lot of like complication around like the way that characters like their feelings around faith. It's not just the fuck the gods. And like there's a character who, you know, went into this city. He saw the seat of the maker and it was empty, as he says. So there is like a physical, or at least there's been a hinted at of the physical space of a god, you know, but there is still like a purpose behind this and the way that it explores like multiple characters that the entire series face, like a big one. She was in the first game, she was in the last game, Liliana. Her whole story is about her relationship with this god, and the way that it there's points where she loses it and there's points where she kind of like her feelings about it really adjust and change based off of this new information she keeps getting. It's just a really 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 interesting like dive into personal faith, and that's something I enjoy, because in D&D and a lot of fantasy, it's no question that the gods exist and are real every time. um and there's not really space for characters who don't believe in the gods. That's not really something that a lot of people get the opportunity to play with in D&D and in a lot of fantasy in general. Everybody knows the gods are real. That's just like a thing, and they make their will very known. um and I like the idea that I can implement like mechanics that do give like certain characters, both by players and by me, the ability to doubt the not necessarily that they're like the realness, but like their intentions and what they are, if they exist in the same way that like the people of this world think that they exist. There is room for doubt, and there's room to play around with personal um like the doubt of faith, which is something that, again, it's largely because it was very cathartic for me. I very much struggled with that as a child, feeling like everybody else around me was connected with this God that I had repeatedly reached out to only to like get nothing in return. And that caused like a lot of pain for me as a young child to feel so disconnected from my community, and also feel like there was something like severely wrong with me, and that I was just like inherently unloved by God. And so there's a lot of like that like in my storytelling when I am writing a world in which like gods are a big thing, has inspired the way that I decide to write, and left room for doubt and left room for misinterpretation of gods, and like what they truly mean, and that personal relationship with faith is not like always a very straightforward one. Um, and so yeah, I pulled a lot of inspiration from Dragon Age in the way that there is doubt about like these gods, if they are actually gods, being within a physical space of a god, what that means, and the nature of the whole thing to begin with. Um, it does mean something in my world, just even though you are more physical, even though there's instances in which they can be killed, but it's more of an exploration of themes rather than something that I am definitively telling my audience in this instance, if that makes sense.
I think this also, the difference between perspectives also comes down to scale as well, because as my world grows, demigods are a thing that really like took hold in the last um like year or so. Like as I started to run, like the first demigods that I had were in the Ebons, which were the Song of the Deep and the Wild Heart, which only carried meaning, which were just like powerful beings in those settings that carried meaning to those settings. Um, but I think there's like two kinds of themes that I have. There's the theme of maybe a specific or like different perspectives on a story that is told through a culture, through the demigods and what they mean, which we are seeing the almost like the forming of in Philia. Um, so like in this particular story, we are discovering what it means to be Philian, and in that forming the demigods. And as the story progresses, I'm looking at different characters, and being like, who is like of PCs or NPCs, who here embodies the feelings of the people. Um, with me, I think the thing that informs my perspective on my gods, and the reason that they represent truths. So I've been hyper critical of myself for a very long time, and I used to be very like when I was went because I was raised Christian to some degree, and then kind of fell out of it, um, and fell into the like I need to have a basis of understanding or reference through what's it called, uh uh like some basis of like framing for my worldview, which became like the like the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, that whole shit, whatever. um but I became very interested in genetics, and I read the selfish gene, which I think most people miss one of the most important points of that book, which is the function of um, thoughts. I think because people get caught up in or thoughts and ideas, people get caught up in the experience of the self, and don't look at the larger picture of what it means to be a person or the function of a person, which is to like not on some senses um, uh, perpetuate like your genes, but more importantly, and the thing that is evolving much faster is ideas and concepts. Like when you look around at uh, uh, like your literal room and the things you have around you, the screens and the microphones and everything, these are ideas first that people found out and then perpetuated through. Um, and so through that was the revelation for me personally, or my interpretation of this, uh, um, was that there is, if you were to have a globalized society that was interconnected, um, uh, which I think we were getting to, you would get closer to like the right thing, like what is right and correct, and the like a more ideal way to like sustain people. And that's where my belief that like people are fundamentally good, and the right thing to do is like functional, because partially because I have to believe that, um but also to me it makes more logistical sense. The long if you look at the longevity of the human race, and start looking at like predictions of where we are going, it would be better if everyone sat down and agreed. That is a more viable um, option. And so I had all these series of self reflections, and through that had these different principles that I adapted. And there's a couple of things that were notable to me through my experiences of life. The first, I remember being in a taxi on the way home from a wedding, 2019, and the driver of the taxi was Muslim, and he's very vocal about it too, and not in a way that was bad in any way. He's very interesting. He was very lovely to talk to, and there are things that he said that aligned very heavily with my personal beliefs and my personal perspectives. And then there's this comedian Pete Holmes, who's very Christian, um, uh, and he has a very, very interesting take on faith as well that is extremely relatable to me, where he's the first person of like Christian faith who I found, who I like didn't find myself in disagreement on anything but the function of how the world, like the universe works, which is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter that you disagree on that. And then but what he said was the same as what this cab driver had expressed through his faith. And obviously, there's heavy connections between those two faiths. The second and third installments in the series, you know what I mean? But I was listening to something that was exploring like I think a Buddhist principle, perhaps, and came around to the same thing, the same principle. And I was like, oh, all of these like lessons from these different faiths across time upon which people reflect on what it means to be a good person come around to the same answers. And I think that is very meaningful. I think that that tells you a lot about um, people and the nature of people. And so to me, the gods represent, because they represent concepts and truths, there has to be the structure for that kind of faith. But then there are also arguments against it, and there are appeals to people's ego and people's flaws in the gods. And so it's not, for me, I think, uh, when you said there's room for people to um, like not believe in the gods, I think for me, depending on the setting, maybe not even that, because thinking about Philia, that's not true. But I think there is room for people to um not believe in um the specific truths of gods. That not everyone needs to look at a religion of like life or death or hope or justice and say that that is functional, because everything has a flaw. Um, I think the thing about my world, I think in a fantasy world, um, the idea of knowing gods are real, that there are higher powers, I think is part of the driving force of the storytelling that drives people towards good. At least in the function of my world. And I personally am hard pressed to I think to me it's the intention with gods within my setting is to find or like to take advantage of the medium almost, of like, if gods are real, then what meaning can be brought from that? But also, again, that comes from my perspective of I have a belief that things are fundamentally good, that people are fundamentally good, and
Well, I don't necessarily like um
but I think you're just
and this
exploring a
is
different thing in your
yeah,
world.
well
Like you,
yeah, there's just you could have a single subject and there be multiple different like nuances and thought processes and things to talk about with like any given subject, honestly. I think my thing with that, like my big thing with that, um um uh and this is not necessarily what I think you're saying, just so you know, just as a caveat. I'm just saying like I think the reason that I stray away from that
I'm gonna take this
is
personally, actually.
you should is there's just something so crushing about being in church and every pastor you've ever like spoken to saying the like, well, without God, how would people know to be good? How do atheists make that decision? And like like even as a child, I was so like, what the fuck are you talking about? Uh maybe because like, and that's something depending on a certain player in one of my games that I would like to go into, considering like this character's religion is like, without this, would you still choose this path of the redemption of others and like seeing that good? Without that, would you still try because it is the right thing to do? And we'll see if this player picks that ball up. We'll see if they notice, because it's something that I'm vaguely interested in. If it's an area that they don't pick up, and that's fine. But um, that is like something that I think about a lot, and probably like I think a big reason why I don't tend to like move in that direction, and um, is because I think that if you need like that to be a good person, then like there perhaps needs to be a reevaluation of of ideals. And that's like a big thing for me. Um, but I think again also like because when I say I grew up Christian, it was like very, very, very culty in my area, and like the community that I grew up in was very culty, um, and super harsh towards anybody who was not. A lot of Christians grow up that way, but there's some people who like grow up like kind of casual Christians. I envy that life. But my family was like hardcore Christians. In a part of a church that is fairly well known for being garbage across the country. Um, Shout out to anybody who knows what the International House of Prayer is, and all the stupid garbage they've done. Um, but like plenty of Christians in America would immediately know what church I'm speaking about. And plenty of people who are not Christians who have studied that in any way. So I grew up in a very, very upsetting environment when it came to religion and the way that they treated people who were not like engaged in that way. But again, just like that language about like, well, like you can't be good without it like tying into religion in some way. That is, you have nothing to incentivize you. And if you need an incentive, there's probably an issue. Um, and that's like my like feelings about the thing, and why I don't think that like my brain is like interested in getting in that way. But again, like you said, I we're just exploring two different facets of like
Mm-hmm.
the same concept. And there's even more different ways you could go from it than just the two ways that we talked about. And there's a lot of different ways that people can explore a subject.
Yeah, I think one of the most important details about my world and the gods is that all of these things, all these concepts that they embodied existed before there were gods who
Mm-hmm.
existed in the myths,
That's
right?
the
There
vibe
was,
that I was getting
yeah,
based on the way you were talking, which is like it's a concept that I like a lot more. It's still like for me personally too close to the like my brain just is like I'm
mm,
just gonna stay away from that. But it's a concept I prefer much more to it being the other way around.
yeah,
Um, uh, because it does come with that idea that humans are not just humans, I guess, in this all are
mhm,
there is like a capacity, a inherent nature to being good, which is themes that I enjoy because I and agree with those on like a fundamental level when it comes to like just humanity. Um, I feel like this is a topic that's been coming up with people I've spoken to a lot lately. Like a lot of people I've been talking to lately. This is like a topic that's come up. Is the kind of like that like empathy and doing the good thing is always puts you in a better position, um and like it just is the right way to go about things.
mm. I one of the players recently, so there's a player who is the son of two keepers of balance. Keepers of balance are worshippers of Athesia, the goddess of life in the world. So like the best people, just the nicest, kindest, goodest, goody two shoes. but not in a way that's like unwise. It is like they are active participants in the world and are not isolated. They face down the like hardships of the world and try to alleviate pain. And his character is not is like his intake taken into indiggity talk those principles of being raised by keepers of balance, but isn't personally religious. And there's a thing that he mentioned last night in the session that I was like, I really wish I had the brain space to like communicate this properly, because he was like, oh, I don't really like follow Athesia. And what I wanted to say as like the parents he's talking to them is like, you do though, like you don't worship Athesia, but like you're a good person, and that is close enough. Like if you are have been raised by two people who worship life and you have their principles, it does not matter that you do not worship this God. You're embodying almost every ideal. Um uh and that holds like almost as much significance. Um and yeah, I think that leans into the idea of that the truths exist outside of the gods just embody them. And it's fundamentally the truths of the cosmos that give power to the gods in a sense, or that are like fundamentally present, that the gods just make conscious in some sense, and give personality and expression to. Because the gods also, like in my world, although rarely, um most gods do not present themselves as they were in mortal life. Most gods, if you are from a place that knows about the gods like Actios or Misathiah, people will be like, oh yeah, and here's what the god looks like as a person. And here's how they kind of express themselves in visions. um I think one of the only like two gods who really express themselves just as, well, I guess three, four, as they are some that are kind of like near the top end. So there is, I don't think Willinaire actually, but the god of absurdity. I don't think he'd ever show himself to anyone. But if he did, I think he would express just as a dude. I think it would be very important to that religion that he's just a dude.
It's just some guy.
Same with vengeance. Now, vengeance is a whole other thing in my world, and um, part of this, I can't even get into that because that's a big kind of secret. Um, but then there is Athesia, who will send visions of people of just herself, and Garagoth, who's the god of hope, who will also, like, if there is a chance to communicate with someone, um, they'll just see a little goblin guy. But what I find really fun about the storytelling of the gods is that, like, we had a character, David, the younger one. I had this character who was a cleric of hope and was dying of this cleric's disease. It wasn't like, oh, I'm suffering and stuff. It was just like he was a good cleric for so long that his soul just belongs in Tenegal, in like the plane of hope, more than it does in the material plane, and he's just fading, and that's okay. But there's this moment where he hit the point, the threshold, where he was more, um uh like belonging in one place than the other, but his body was still in the material plane, and that gave him access to be able to comprehend Garagoth because he wasn't um completely mortal anymore.
Mm.
And I played the scene where everyone else, through Wilwyn's body, through his character's body, blinding light. It was the middle of the night, and then blinding light of the dawn, just far as the eye can see, just from this god connecting with this person's soul just a little bit. to like just to like um what's it called? And we had this character who could see people's auras, who had to like get the fuck back because it was so powerful. Just this like minor thing. Um, and there's something. I think there's something. I guess when we've talked about like the element of wonder and the place of wonder in the world, I think there's something wondrous about the way that's intriguing to me about playing gods is that kind of wondrous. Last thing I'll say about the scale of the world, I've talked about before about how the storytelling is such that a group of 6 people do not save the world. It is a collective effort. It is groups of people in some, and it's not the world, it's a land, it's a place in the world. um but I got to run an in-person session last week of my home game for the first time with that party, because it started in the pandemic and it's always been online. And they beat the like big kind of boss battle that I'd been planning for over a year. And by planning, I built the thing over a year ago. I didn't plan it that long. Um, but they beat it. But they had also discovered like a secret that I had hoped to keep to hold on to rather. And as they continue the campaign, they're entering the part of the storytelling where they will realize and will be told quite explicitly that they are too small, that their little lives, as powerful as they are as 20th level characters, as they enter the larger stage of the world, they are very vulnerable compared to what is out there.
Mm.
And the thing that they will be chasing um is like, for me, no holds barred. I am from this point forward will be disincentivizing the characters to continue. Not in a way that is like, stop playing this game. I'll run it as long as they want to run it. And I'll continue the story as long as they want to tell it. But like, this character is so powerful that it is not even feasible for these 5 20th level bards to face.
Wow.
This is there are things in the world that even are still in the realm of like material and mortal that cannot be faced, or are with outside of the realm of the vast majority of people to face. Um and I'm gonna have to be very careful about how I play that too, in a way that feels like they can tell the ends of their stories and wrap up their things, and um still come to a satisfying conclusion.
Mm.
Because ultimately, like, the thing, I don't want to undercut the things that they did in the campaign, which is to like save their people and the things that they cared about and fight for those things, yada yada yada. um but it's like, it is time to humble the party. um yeah, anyways, those are, so that's, I think that I wanted to connect that earlier in the nature of demigods, of how powerful some things are. Like Rodavir, for example, who is a the current gold progenitor dragon in my world, who's like been alive since 2 years after the dawn of time. His head alone is like 200 feet high. He's an immense, a creature of immense scale. Um, I had this idea that one day I hope to run a campaign that deals with the Ferudic Empire, where it like gets to level 20 and I have a battle. And it'll be another thing where there's like multiple groups, but I have a battle against just one of these dragons with a bunch of 20 level characters, and it being like fucking difficult.
Mm.
It's like you are as powerful as you can feasibly be, and this thing is so beyond you, and it is just the top of this power scale, that there are
Mm,
even things that this bows to. Um, uh, that is, I don't know. I guess that encapsulates like I don't even know. I just want to communicate that. I think that's fun. I could connect it into a theme of what I was saying. My brain's running out of juice.
no juice in the brain.
My brain's
No
not very
juice in the
juicy.
brain. I am. I am. How do I put this? Uh, I'm going to get to a point eventually in my campaigns where, like, I've thought a lot about how I wanted to do this. Um, because I think like what's going to happen is that like eventually, I've kind of talked to you about this. Eventually, we'll get to a point. They get to around 10-ish. Big things are going to happen. People who kind of want to continue on the same characters or are going to be in different parties, want different character, whatever. Start at these levels, move forward. There is like still some stories to be told in like those like they'll get to 20 by the end of like kind of the second season, so to speak. I don't think everybody will do this, but also that's because I think at that point it is not feasible that all of these characters would move upwards, and quite a lot of them would get to up to 20, but there are still like a few stories to be told after that, and a few things I like a few themes that I'd really like to explore. So I've thought about the idea of like um letting kind of a select few players get a bit cracked to kind of like deal with shit. However, like the nature of those characters and that story, it would be like the amount of characters equal to a single party, probably not within the same original party, um, that could do such a thing. But again, it would be like so specific because like the very nature of a being at that point in this world would begin to shift, and like the way that they would even think about self would begin to shift, and it would just be such a specific theme to run with. There's a select few people that I would trust that in the hands, like trust that in their hands. But yeah, it's kind of what that was making me think about. I have to pee so bad.
I think you're coming up to your session as well, so
I
we can
do, yeah.
close it out here. Folks, this has been the story of the Apprentice podcast. It's broadcast where we talk about
Mm.
D&D and TTRPGs and storytelling, and sometimes we're really articulate and sometimes we're less articulate. I am one of the hosts, Jesse T. William, and with me,
Dorothy
closing out with
Slate
his
Sweetly.
final thoughts.
Ah,
I think you
it's
said
it's me.
Torquing.
It's
Yeah, see.
turn. It's it. I. It's a.
Torquing
Ha,
us all very
it's
sweetly.
me. I'm very sweet. I'm sweet with it.
Torker Porterson. Torker
Torkin.
reporter. That's
He's got it.
I should have had my hand on the stop